In today's political climate, having civil discourse with those of opposing opinions has become increasingly difficult, particularly for college aged people. College campuses have become a hotbed for discussions about free speech, but at the same time, students are reportedly self censoring and also shutting down having difficult conversations in classrooms. And what we know is that when students cease to participate in these kinds of conversations, and when they self select into groups where everyone shares similar views, that the kind of understanding and respect for others' opinions that's necessary for a functioning democracy really begins to disappear. And it's why initiatives like the National Week of Conversation are so vital for college campuses and for their students. Here at James Madison University, one of the lead mobilizers for the Higher Ed Dialogue and Listening Group for the National Week of Conversation, we hosted 2 weeks of deliberative forums for over 100 students, both here on campus and nationally. And it's during this national conversation, we had students from Alaska to Florida join in NIF style deliberative forums on wicked issues like immigration, youth and opportunity, free speech and inclusivity on college campuses, and climate change. And we also used the Common Ground for Action software to help students visualize when they had common ground where they disagreed with each other, which was incredibly helpful in getting students to recognize when they had differences and to work through those differences, and also where they had points where they just weren't sure. And so we worked to create politically, geographically, and age diverse breakout rooms where students could deliberate by hearing different views, and that they were also then able to share their own stories with people from different places and from different walks of life. And so, what was really interesting is that our survey findings indicated that conversations like the ones that we had as a part of the National Week of Conversation were incredibly important to creating welcoming and robust spaces for students to talk about their own values while engaging differences and opinions of others in really civil, but importantly, in productive ways. When we asked students whether they found at least one item to agree on in their deliberative conversations, 92% of our student participants responded yes, that they found common ground to act on with their deliberative group. And strikingly, 98% of all respondents indicated that they either very strongly or somewhat strongly supported that common ground. So not only did students in these kinds of politically diverse groups find common ground across their ideological differences, but that they had a high degree of support for the actions that their group agreed upon. So I know it's really easy to think that students might find common ground, but that really their support for acting is weak, especially if we're talking about students agreeing on things at a national versus a local level, and especially if their political inclinations are primed and the issue is framed in a polarizing way. Then we kind of say that groups might be willing to say that they agree for social reasons, just to kind of move the conversation along. And I think that is oftentimes what we can see in college classrooms. But when we put these students in deliberative forums as part of the week of conversation, something different happened. And when these students agreed and found common ground, they really said that they would be committed to doing it. One of the other interesting things that we found is as part of this experience is that on all of the questions about students' experience in participating in a deliberative forum, respondents remarked extremely positively about being able to hear new views or opinions, that they felt comfortable expressing their views, and that they felt that they were listened to. 92% of self-identified conservative respondents noted their opinions and views were listened to during the forums, and there was no conservative respondent who indicated that they did not feel listened to. And I think that's a really remarkable uh, kind of conversational point, that people who often come into these conversations and we hear the narrative, that there's a large portion of conservative students on campus who feel not listened to. But in our experience, when when we had conservative students in a room, given the structure that we used for the week of conversation, that they felt listened to. And 100% of both self-identifying moderates and conservative students felt that they could express their views when deliberating. 95% of self-identified liberal students felt they could express their views, a small difference. And again, to put this in sort of a larger framework, that this really runs counter to trends articulated in the media and surveys about students self-censoring, that when we can get them as part of a larger conversation, that the magic really begins to happen. And so, what we found overall as part of our own participation in the National Week of Conversation, in our own efforts at the National Week of Deliberation for college students, is that the way to address these kinds of ultimately polarizing challenges is to ensure that opportunities like campus deliberation and dialogue programming are not one-off or just classroom-only activities, but are really embedded into the civic engagement mission that colleges and universities have. And that developing civic behaviors is a lot like developing civic muscles, that students have to be given these kinds of continual and sustained opportunities to listen, to ask questions in structured settings with students from different backgrounds. And so making programs like the National Week of Conversation and the National Week of Deliberation a capstone event and not the sole event can really help students build the continuum of civic muscles needed for their full participation in democratic life.